Old crushes die hard, and one of my earliest celebrity crushes would probably have to be Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. I think that canceled too soon hosts William Bibiani and Whitney Seibold summed up her act best when they called it a celebration of female arousal.
Oh, Bloody Mary.
No hard liquor served past 8 o'clock. Do you want a virgin?
Maybe, but I'll have a couple of drinks first.
Not only is Elvira rampant in her appetites, but she looks good doing it, too. The idea of a woman being blunt and proactive in her desires is not in itself unique, but for many years before Elvira, it had been served up as an undesirable trait. Women who knew what they wanted and weren't afraid to ask for it were either dangerous.
Come on. Scary, isn't it?
Or they were comically unable to get what they were after. But there was still a precedent for Elvira, one that burned bright in American pop culture, but was silenced by critics for daring to feel good without feeling bad about it. I'm speaking, of course, of Mae West, American Badass. Mae West was born Mary Jane West in Brooklyn in 1893. Her father was a prize fighter who would later work as a private investigator, and her mother was a fashion model. At the age of 7, West began competing in amateur talent contests to help bring in money to support her family. With the encouragement of her mother and the disapproval of almost everybody else in her family, she debuted on the professional stage when she was only 14, appearing under the name Baby Mae. The young West sang, danced, told jokes, and even enjoyed a brief career as a drag king, or as they were known at the time, a male impersonator. West debuted on Broadway at the age of 18 as a cast member in A la Broadway. The show only lasted 8 performances and was roundly panned by critics, except for West, who was singled out for praise in the New York Times Review, which said that she pleased the audience with her grotesquerie and snappy way of singing and dancing.
Hello, boys. Have a good night's rest. I missed you.
Having caught the eye of the live theater world as an entertainer, West went on to write plays under the pseudonym Jane Mast. She debuted her 1926 play Sex to sold-out audiences, but it wasn't long before police acted on complaints from religious groups and raided the theater, arresting West along with the entire cast. Convicted of corrupting the morals of youth, West was offered a choice between going to jail or paying a fine, and reportedly decided that jail would be better publicity. West's next play, The Drag, touched on themes of homosexuality. It ran tryouts in Connecticut and New Jersey, but the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice managed to stop her from producing it on Broadway. This pattern would follow West's early career through further plays until 1928, when she hit Broadway with the smash success Diamond Lil. The role garnered national attention, and before long, West was speaking to Paramount Pictures. In 1932, nearing the age of 40, West signed a contract with the studio and appeared in her first major film role as Maudie in George Raft's Night After Night. West initially bucked at being offered such a small role, but accepted it gracefully after she was told that she could rewrite all of her own dialogue. The result, as George Raft would later put it, she stole everything but the cameras.
We're going in with you, Marty.
Now, you know my father's very strict, and he don't let me see boys after 9 o'clock.
Oh, cut the kidding, Maud.
Now, why don't you guys be good and go home to your wives?
Who is it?
The fairy princess, you mug.
Marty!
Paramount in those days had fallen on hard times. It hadn't had a major hit film for years, and its debtors were knocking at the door. For her second film and her first starring role, West wrote the screenplay She Done Him Wrong, based on her Broadway show Diamond Lil. It brought in over $2 million at the box office. In today's dollars, that's $140 million, and it not only established West as a force to be reckoned with, but also introduced Cary Grant to film audiences. West herself cast Grant, and as the story goes, she saw him on the Paramount backlot where he was shooting a one-line role for another movie, turned to the producer next to her and said, "If he speaks English, I'll take him."
Do you mind if I get personal?
Go right ahead. I don't mind if you got familiar. It's all in the family.
Well then, do you really care for Kirk? I mean, do you love him?
Well, I don't know. See, my horoscope says so.
I'm afraid I don't understand.
I'm afraid I don't understand it myself sometimes.
Mae West was credited with single-handedly saving Paramount from bankruptcy. Almost immediately, West became ubiquitous within the culture. She was lauded and parodied everywhere, from Betty Boop cartoons to Cole Porter songs and Frida Kahlo paintings. And the entire time, West continued writing and starring in her own work. By 1935, she was not only the highest paid woman in America, she was the second highest paid person, period, with only William Randolph Hearst ahead of her. And that's when the pain really started. In 1934, the Production Code Administration fell under the leadership of Joseph I. Breen. The PCA was charged with enforcing the Motion Picture Production Code, more commonly known as the Hays Code, which was a series of censorship guidelines for film productions. The code had already been around for years at the time, but studios paid it little or no attention. Breen immediately began using the censor's scissors, cutting nude scenes from 1934's Tarzan and His Mate, and barring Howard Hughes's The Outlaw from theaters because Jane Russell's breasts were featured more prominently than the code allowed. For a couple of years, West still managed to get by under the code. While her humor was racy, her movies were still relatively free from Hays-restricted content. She started peppering her scripts with jokes that would never make it past the PCA, but which helped distract the censors from her more subtle innuendo, and she enjoyed a certain level of protection from Paramount as their top-earning star and the woman who had saved their company from extinction.
Now, you gave me those presents because you liked me a little, didn't you?
Yes.
I didn't ask you for them, did I?
Well, I don't regret giving them to you if that's what you mean.
Thanks. I didn't think you did.
But that changed after 1936's Klondike Annie. The film was critical of religion and hypocrisy, and many critics felt it was her best work to date. But Klondike Annie attracted the ire of the wealthiest person in America, William Randolph Hearst. Perhaps the infamous muckraker was offended by the film's themes, or perhaps he was still upset that West had apparently snubbed his invitation to visit his estate back in 1934. Or one popular theory is that West had made a joke about his mistress, Marion Davies. But whatever the reason, Hearst declared Mae West to be public enemy number one. His publications refused to sell advertising space to Paramount for any film with West in it. And he even inquired publicly, "Isn't it time Congress did something about the Mae West menace?" Faced with pushback from Hearst, Paramount began trying to rein in Mae West, and the PCA sensed weakness. The free rein she had enjoyed to write her own dialogue started disappearing, with more and more restrictions put on her jokes, her music, and her costuming. By 1937, it was close to impossible for West to get away with her act on screen, and Paramount ended her contract following the box office failure of the heavily censored Every Day's a Holiday. The same year, following an appearance with Edgar Bergen and one in an Arch Oboler sketch for NBC, West was also fined by the FCC and barred from appearing on the radio.
Eve, it's as if I see you for the first time. You're beautiful.
And you fascinate me.
Your eyes.
Oh, tell me more.
Your lips. Come closer. I want to hold you closer. I want to...
You want to what?
Eve, what was that?
That was the original kiss.
In 1938, West's name would appear alongside Dolores Del Rio's and Fred Astaire's in the red-bordered box office poison ad run by the Independent Theater Owners Association, declaring that theater owners would no longer guarantee that they would play her movies. She would only appear in 2 more films before falling out of Hollywood for almost 3 decades. 1939's My Little Chickadee and 1943's The Heat's On. Despite their on-screen chemistry, she despised working with W.C. Fields in the former, and the latter she did only as a favor to the director, but she faced her heaviest censorship yet. Effectively cut out of film and radio by religious watchdogs, the PCA and Hearst, Mae West returned to the live stage, playing nightclubs, Vegas, and Broadway.
I wasn't a married man. I could go for you, baby.
No wise cracks now. Penny for your thoughts.
I suppose you could ask if the Hays Code really did target artists like West. Was it really misogynist? After all, it had so many labyrinthine regulations regarding sexuality on the screen that it would be easy to say it was just anti-sex in general. But remember that West's movies were by and large very clean. She was just a woman who wasn't afraid to pursue what she wanted. And if you flip West's persona and turn it into a male character, you get Dean Martin in just about every Martin and Lewis movie. Not to mention all of his imitators. The Hays Code had no problem with somebody who wouldn't take no for an answer as long as they were male. When Mae West finally returned to film, it was in 1970, 2 years after the Hays Code had been put to rest in favor of the modern-day rating system, in an era when Hollywood was experimenting with new freedom from censorship. Unfortunately, her return was in 1970's Myra Breckinridge, which was so plagued with production problems that writer Gore Vidal would later refer to the movie as an awful joke. West's scenes were heavily edited, but even so she received star billing, and the film helped to push her back into the public eye. West was still independently wealthy and spent the rest of her days only accepting work that interested her. Her final production was 1978's Sextet, which she adapted from her 1959 stage script. The cast not only included Tony Curtis, Alice Cooper, and Dom DeLuise, but also featured George Raft, who had starred in the very first movie Mae West ever made for Paramount.
Always a pal, eh, Morty? What do you think of her, Miss Jellyman?
I think one of my favorite bits of trivia about Mae West is that apparently during her hiatus from film, she employed a chauffeur in New York City, and that chauffeur was a part-time driver who was working on building his own acting career. Mae West was chauffeured around New York City by none other than Lumiere himself, Jerry Orbach. And I find this incredibly interesting because, of course, Jerry Orbach spent years on television playing Lenny Briscoe on Law & Order, and when you take a typical Mae West joke...
If you'd try, you could resist every temptation.
What's the good of resisting temptation? There'll always be more.
And put it side by side with a typical Lenny Briscoe joke.
Well, they certainly have their stories straight.
A little too straight, don't you think?
Oh, come on. Last night I brushed my teeth at 11:47.
It sounds an awful lot like Jerry Orbach picked up some tips from Mae West. So tell me, what do you think of Mae West, American Badass? If you're interested in her films, there are Blu-rays of them available, just released recently. I'll put an affiliate link down in the description below. She is someone who, even though she had a relatively short film career, left Hollywood with a long-standing legacy. Drop down into the comments below. Let me know what you think of Mae West. Let me know what's your favorite Mae West movie. Have you ever seen a Mae West movie? If you haven't, what are you going to look up first? While you're down there in the comments letting me know any of those things, there's also the like and subscribe buttons. If you haven't hit those already, do me a favor and go ahead and click on them. And of course, there's also a share button so you can share this video with your friends, because sharing is caring. Until next time, I am the Film Optimist, reminding you to watch like it means something.